Hi. Considering I told you we were
So I keep you around.
Anyone else?
Okay, again, as Avi beautifully said, it's great that everyone took the time out to come learn a little bit more about kosher. Kosher exists on a lot of levels from, I know a rabbi in Israel who won't touch any food unless his wife made it for him. Forget any hechsher at all in the world. There are people who will rely on any hechsher. There's a variety of levels to kosher. We'll discover, I think, in this class that there's a lot about kosher that maybe we didn't even realize existed. And a lot about kosher that even throughout the class will be new to us, will be old to us. Definitely everyone is welcome to give their feedback, give their input. Questions are always welcome. Try to keep them relevant, or else we could talk afterwards. We're not going to be able to cover everything. I'm not planning on ordaining you guys afterwards, unless you want to stay. If anyone wants to commit the next 5 years of Sunday nights, we could try to work towards rabbinic ordination.
Can you?
Can I? I did my 5 years already. I'm passing it on to you guys. But my goal in this really is to present to you all of the aspects of kosher. It's more than just milk and meat separately. It's more than just finding, the OU, the CRC. It's more than just finding the right symbol. There are a lot of aspects to it. If there's something that I skipped or that you want to make sure I'm going to cover, really please, I'm not insulted if you tell me things aren't good, are good. The point of this is for us all to gain the knowledge and to grow from it. So that's the main thing that's supposed to come out of this. I wasn't planning on saying any philosophy about kosher at all. This is really a class on halacha, on law. But does anyone here know Nathan Raphaelov? Anyone? I know Isaac knows him. No one else? He's getting married a week from tomorrow night. Nice stuff. So he told me a nice story about kosher last night. So I figured in his honor, we'll share one story. And then if you want a class, again, on philosophy of why the beauty of kosher, there definitely is a lot of beauty there. It's not the purpose of this class. But one quick story, there was a Jewish religious man on an airplane, takes out of his backpack his quadruple wrapped sandwich, he's trying to peel off the 17 steels and layers. Finally he gets to the sandwich and he takes it on. There's this very high-powered woman sitting next to him who you could tell from looking at her, she was well-to-do and had a great job. And she's just watching him, peel off these layers and get to the kosher sandwich. And she turns to him and she says, do you mind if I ask you, what are you doing? So he said, well, I'm Jewish and I only eat kosher, so we have to buy stuff that we know is kosher, so we wrap it in a certain way to make sure that this is the same thing the person put into it, and it's kosher. So she says, why do you care? So it's kosher. Okay, you can get a sandwich and it won't be kosher. What's the difference? So he looks to her and he says, what kind of car do you drive? You can tell she's going to drive a nice car. So she says a Maserati. I don't know. She says a Maserati. I drive a Maserati. He says, what kind of gasoline do you fill your tank with? 87 octane or you go premium? So she says, it's a Maserati. You got to put in premium. He says, well, what happens if you don't put in premium? So she says, the car will break. He said, all Jews were premium. He said, when we put it into our body, we're very careful what goes in. We don't just take the 87 octane and put it in, right? We're careful to make sure our body is united, it's connected to our soul, and we want to make sure that what feeds it and what gives the life to our body and our soul is of the purest burning food that can be, and therefore we eat kosher. So that's just a nice story, a nice intro. Now we're on to the laws of kosher. So kosher is something that's, all of Torah in a certain sense adapts to the world. Everyone who knows me a little bit knows that I love Jewish medical ethics. Part of what always attracted me to that topic is that it's fascinating to me to see how the Torah principles apply to things that are so current and so modern day and things that are always evolving. Kosher is very similar. If you look at our class, or our keeping of kosher, our halacha of kosher, it's totally different than any of you who have grandparents that are still alive and can ask them what kosher was like. If any of them grew up in Europe or any of them grew up, they didn't even have electricity, forget kosher, right? But the kosher process has been extremely evolving, even just in terms of supervision. Can you have a camera be a Jewish supervisor if you see everything that goes on, or do you need a Jewish person standing there supervising? Right? Meaning just the technological advances. There's so many, we're not going to discuss that unfortunately in this class, but there's just so many things that have changed, and in a certain way, it's a lot easier to keep kosher now because you can really go into any 7-Eleven, any airport you're stuck in, you can find a bag of crackers, you can find peanuts. You could find something to live on when it used to be, if you ever wanted anything, you had to bring it with you. In a certain sense, that process has gotten us a lot farther as well. So I guess the most basic place to start, I guess I'll say one more story first. My father is actually a caterer. So kosher is something that's close to our family's roots. My grandfather started the business, and when he started the business, they didn't have a kosher certification, because in Chicago in the, I don't know when this was, the 40s maybe, there was no, we think now in terms of kosher certification is like so obvious. It's like the past 30 years that like it blew up and turned into this. But if you go back 50 years, everyone knew my grandfather was a trustworthy, good Jew, and everyone would use him. And that was just how kosher worked. You had a name for yourself, and everyone knew the rabbi trusted you of the town. And in Europe, that's what it was. Every town had their shochet, their slaughterer, and everyone knew you could trust this guy. And there's halachas in the code of Jewish law. If a guy lies once, you have to throw him away one time. You get 2 chances till you kick him out of being the official slaughterer of a town. And it really worked with trust. As food industry really developed and got much more complex, it became much harder to do that. There's a great article, I printed it out. It's on the side there. You can take it home with you afterwards. It's with Rabbi Shalom Fishbane, is the director of kosher for the Chicago Rabbinical Council, the CRC. It's not in the packet I gave to you. And it's called The Changing Face of Kashrus in the Light of Modern Technology. And there's just one thing I would read to you, although for some reason I blacked it out of mine. I thought I would highlight it. That is, they asked the following question. In the old days, many people would take a package and look at the ingredients. Why can't we just look at the ingredients nowadays? And, you read the ingredients and you see it's kosher. What has evolved in our world, in the food industry in general, nothing to do with kosher? So he writes, let me give you an example. We recently checked the name brand cherry soda. Shalom Fishbane? Sound familiar? Okay, it wasn't Pepsi. We recently checked a name brand cherry soda. The ingredients listed only water, sugar, cherry flavor, carbonation. 4 things. It seems simple enough. Well, what is in that cherry flavor? First of all, it has cherry wine. It also has something called castoreum, which comes from a beaver. There was an additional ingredient called civet, C-I-V-E-T, maybe kivet, I assume civet, which comes from a cat. This concern for suspect ingredients touches more than sodas. In so-called natural flavors, there could be some very non-kosher items. Ingredients can also be dairy. There's a sorbet with an ingredient list of sugar, water, raspberry puree, and flavor. The flavor is actually dairy because there was butter in that flavor. So again, that could be a problem to serve this sorbet, which you would never know by reading the ingredients. So basically, what comes out is not only is this a problem if you're Jewish nowadays, but if you're vegetarian also, and you think that you're just going to buy regular products, you don't really know what's inside any natural flavors. Animals are natural. They're not man-made. So cats and beavers and cows and chickens, they're all natural ingredients. So the question is, how do we know where these things come from? So in our evolving world of food, it really required that the Jewish world respond with this kind of, Jewish certification that's looking into these things. And we'll get into this more, I guess what I've just mentioned it now. This is also why we talk about different levels of certification. Like, you'll hear people saying, like, oh, that's not a good hechsher. Like, what does it mean? It has a K in it and it has a little design around it. So, they're checking for it to be kosher, so it's kosher. So, like, you could read this article where he explains this question also, where he explains how much you have to be understanding of the technology. Like he said he took courses, I think, in Wisconsin University, something like that, on how, I don't remember what it was, washers work, or it's like a course on it, because to properly understand, if you run a non-kosher run on something, and then you make it kosher in between, and then you run a kosher run, well, you have to really know how exactly the machine's working, and how the koshering of it really makes it kosher. And without having a real understanding of all the ingredients and their subparts, and the mechanisms, and the technology and everything, there's just exists room for error. So because of that, it's not because we think any rabbi who's giving it as a bad person, or he's not serious about it, doesn't have real fear of God, and he wants Jews to sin. None of that's true. There's just different levels of standard and different care that different organizations put into their certification. And that's why it's important to know what's considered an appropriate certification when you're searching for them. Just as one last thing is to mention to start, there's a fantastic app. You can get it on any app store. It's called the CRC app. CRC is the Chicago Rabbinical Council. This has nothing to do with me being from Chicago. It's the one that I found to have the best UI of all the other apps. You could try OU or OK or Chafke or whatever you want. The CRC app is a very simple app, It has a list of everything that you could search for food items in it. It's a great app. Again, I'll give you at the end if you don't have it already. You can always text me, call me, email me. You don't have to ask. You can ask the rabbi also, or not me, or any other rabbi you guys talk to, and you want to ask. You don't have to use the app, but you're not going to. Sometimes you feel like it's just like a stupid question, which you could still call the rabbi for. We don't mind at all. But if you want to just check it up quickly and see if it's not a problem, it's just a great starting point. Just to basically have a list of everything on it. Because, for example, the opposite direction also, like you have most Kellogg cereals have a K on them. A K, the rule is you can't copyright a letter. You can only copyright a design. So anything that has a K on it is inherently unreliable because you can't copyright that. So anybody who wants to put a K on anything can put a K on it. So you have to know, Kellogg's, if you go to the OU's website or the Sears website and they list kosher cereals, they'll all say just about, check each one individually, I can't say all of them, but just about all Kellogg cereals, it'll say on it, it's fine if it has a K on it. Why? Because they looked into it and they know that it's fine. Right? If you looked into it and know it's fine, then you don't really need a certification. The certification is just validating that they checked it out and they know everything. So a K inherently is meaningless because you can't copyright it. However, there still are certain products, which is why it's good to have the app and stuff, that even though they only have a K, they happen to be kosher. If anyone would move to England, I don't know about this recently, but I know from my friends that used to live there, they don't have, like, a lot of them don't have, I think it's gotten better in recent years. They used to not have hechshers on almost any products, and they had lists of, like, what's good and what's not good, which is really annoying.
South Africa, they publish a book every year.
But they don't have it on the products.
Not all of them, some of them.
Yeah, so it makes it much harder. We're blessed. We have the easy way out. But again, it doesn't change it. It means they looked into it and they know. So, yeah.
Even on the CRC app, even a lot of products that have no symbols at all, they say it's okay to buy.
Right.
So it's just good to know.
It's good also a lot with alcohols, scotches, and whiskeys and stuff. They have a good section on all those things also. Just a lot of them don't have hechshers on them. So just a good thing. The CRC app will come up again. We'll quote him again. He's a good one. Okay, so tonight I wanted to really discuss kosher products. Like we started discussing now, certification, going through everything kosher, bringing out things that you didn't realize needed to be kosher, things that you thought were kosher, things that sometimes are kosher, sometimes not. So let's start with domesticated animals, such as, everyone recognizes animals? Cow. Sheep. Missing one? Goat. Perfect. Domesticated animals, there's more. This isn't the entire list of domesticated animals. Kosher meat. So we all know kosher meat must have 2 feet, chew its cud. I know some song like that. My kids know it. Has to have split hooves and chew its cud. That's the most classic definition of kosher meat. But if you move past that, well, how do we make it kosher? So kosher meat requires what we call shechita in Hebrew, which means ritual slaughter. There's a unique way it needs to be slaughtered, which is why if you have a kosher-style hot dog, which might be 100% beef, and you know it's from a cow because if not, the FDA would sue them, or whatever it is, it's not necessarily going to be kosher, because kosher requires shechita, which requires a certain specific process of ritual slaughter. Beyond that process, once it's slaughtered, there's a process of salting. Blood we'll get to is forbidden to eat animal blood. Biblically, the verse says explicitly in Torah, you can't eat blood. So therefore we salt all beef, and the salt, the natural reaction of salt when put on beef is it drains it out. We once saw this, took our field trips after we did our kosher class, and you watch, you put the salt in it and immediately starts just extracting, blood starts coming out of it. It's very cool, if you like that. But that's, so again, if you buy non-kosher meat, even if it's beef, it won't be slaughtered properly, and it won't be salted properly. Even if it was slaughtered and salted properly, you have to also be able to know where it came from, which is why we put seals around. If you go to Tom Thumb in their kosher section, all of their meat that obviously they're verifying has been slaughtered and salted, because that seal is there, you can be sure that this is the same meat that they placed there. If it wouldn't have a seal on it, so how are we to know that this is the same meat? Maybe someone, which happens a lot in Tom Thumb, took one from the other section and put it down there just because they were walking by and they decided they don't want it anymore. I find that in the sushi section of Tom Thumb all the time. People take sushi from the non-kosher one, they probably took 3 or whatever it is, and they realize, oh, I don't need this, and they see, oh, another place with sushi, so they put it down. I definitely have seen that. It doesn't have wrappings on it. It's not like no one's trying to get you, but it probably just happens. So I normally take it and throw it at the wall. No, I'm just kidding. I try to move it at least away from the other sushi. I put it like across by like the shellfish. You know what I'm talking about? But you just something to be cognizant of. Meat has to be in the seal, or else it could be problematic. That's the basics of domesticated animals. So all we really need to know nowadays, if anyone has grandparents, I remember I asked my grandmother, my bubby, we learned like the laws of salting animals. And it's like very technical laws of like how you salt it and how long and that's all different ones. It's like really annoying. And I mean, it's really beautiful. And afterwards, we were memorized, we were working on it, we did it for a while. After I asked my grandmother, she just knew all the laws of salting. She's like, yeah, like when we grew up in Moonkotch, like, what do you think we did? We ate meat once every decade, and whenever we did it, we salted it. Like it was part of life. They all knew these things. This was like, ask your grandparents, if they grew up in America, maybe less. But for sure, if they grew up, in Europe or Russia or many of these other places or in Asia, they probably know about these things, which you would never even realize that they knew about. I was like shocked. I'm like, how'd you know that? But they do. So for us nowadays, the main thing we really need to know is what we talked about before, the kosher symbols. This is just a random list. Don't memorize this. It just looks nice on the slide. But again, kosher symbols. And as we mentioned before, kosher symbols, we haven't even South Africa here. I should have checked. I need to look familiar. A lot of them are American.
I don't see it.
All right. Anyways, did the DK make it? Everybody, that's the Dallas kosher over there. Shout out. We made the list.
Yeah.
Exactly. So again, as we mentioned before, kosher symbols. So not all symbols were created equally, like we mentioned. It's nothing against the people. It's nothing against the organization. There's different knowledge levels. The advancement of the CRC, you can read it in the thing, of their computer system that analyzes, just breaking down stuff and knowing what it comes from, where it can come from, and just the details and the just tremendous knowledge you need to do that properly is just hard to do on a smaller scale until you're a big organization. And because of that, the DK, I believe, has on their website a list of acceptable symbols on the CRC app as well. Anyone check it out. You'll find out there are also a very long list, many good hashers, just to keep your eyes open for that as well. Okay, so that's really the kosher symbols. After meat, the next one is birds and fowl, or fowl. So, how many birds are kosher? Anyone know?
Well,
At least
you don't know the exact number because it depends on if it's in your tradition of your family.
Okay, Isaac said it depends. It's a good Jewish answer.
Yeah.
It depends.
Anyone
Anyone else?
Exact number.
No exact number?
All of them.
All of them?
No idea.
What's
No,
this?
Miss Hindu.
Okay, not all of them. Good guess though. No, it was a great guess.
Turkeys and chickens are okay.
Turkeys and chickens are okay. Okay, we need to get a circle over them. So the truth is, the Torah actually doesn't list how many birds are kosher. It lists how many birds are not kosher, because it's a much shorter list of not kosher birds than kosher birds. There are 24 non-kosher birds. All other birds are kosher. However, there are certain signs that birds need to have, and if these birds don't have these signs, so we don't know what they are. So basically, what we end up with is we have a tradition for certain birds, and based on our tradition, we have an acceptance of most birds. Now, like Denise just mentioned, chickens and turkeys are fine. So chicken, we for sure have a tradition for them, saying they ate it for the Friday night dinner for Shabbos for the past, since Mount Sinai, right? That's what you have. You have chicken. Chicken soup. Like, what would the Jews be without chicken soup? So we definitely have chickens. Turkeys, interestingly enough, I remember I had a friend in high school who actually doesn't eat turkey. Turkey was kind of a North American creature, and there's somewhat of a debate exactly, is it the same family? Is it not the same family? 99% of Jews, everyone in this room should all eat turkey, enjoy it. It is totally kosher. But again, there's a certain sensitivity we all have to be aware of, that there's always going to be people that won't be comfortable with our level of kosher. I have this myself. There are people in the Dallas community that won't eat at my house as well. They are stringent on certain things that, let's say, I'm personally not stringent on. Again, it's not like a personal thing. There's a lot of levels, and everyone's on their level, on their observance level. But it's something to be sensitive to know, oh, there are people that are more careful on certain things than I am, which is fine. So turkey is another example of that, where there do exist some people. I don't think you would have to ask before they came, because I would assume most people that we all know believe it's fine. But I do know a few people that don't eat turkeys. So now, there's a rule in the Code of Jewish Law, and that is that anything that comes from a kosher animal is kosher. So, for example, chicken eggs that come from a chicken are kosher by extension because they come from the chicken. Ostrich eggs, which come from the ostrich, are not kosher because they come from a am I totally lying?
No.
Come from a non-kosher animal. So again, just in terms of kosher products, any egg that's coming from a non-kosher animal would be problematic in terms of kosher, because if it comes from a kosher animal, by extension, it's kosher. If it comes from a non-kosher animal, by extension, it's non-kosher. What's the big question on this? What's an example, pop trivia question, of something that is kosher that comes from a non-kosher animal?
Honey.
He saw the next slide. I knew I shouldn't have given you guys the slide. No, he actually knows. He actually knows. Okay, fine. It's all good. I'm sure Brian knew. If we go to the next slide, we find the beautiful little bees over here. And the bees are making honey, right? Bees make honey. Now, we all know, what would Rosh Hashanah be without our apple dipped in honey? So honey, again, by default, has to be kosher. So the question is, why is honey kosher? Why is it not considered like an ostrich egg, a byproduct of a bee? So there's a debate in the Gemara. What if you look scientifically, what happens is bees take nectar into their mouths. There's an enzyme in bees' saliva. It sounds delicious. There's an enzyme in bees' saliva that interacts with the nectar, which they spit back out, and it creates honey. Since that nectar is never digested by the bees, never became really a part of the bee, it just went in its mouth and back out, therefore it's considered not coming from a non-kosher animal, right? An ostrich egg comes from an ostrich. Honey doesn't actually come from bees. Honey is a reaction from nectar that interacts with enzymes that bees have in their mouths. So therefore, honeys are kosher, which is why we could have apples dipped in honey. Other bee products, though, for example, anyone familiar with royal jelly? Okay, it is a product. You can look at it. It's kind of like a natural health product. It's often used for certain deficiencies. People take royal jelly. Royal jelly is a secretion from the ear of the queen bee. That's why it's called royal jelly. It's from the queen bee. So now, the queen bee is not kosher. Secretions that the queen bee gives off will therefore also not be kosher. So again, this probably, if no one's heard of it till now, won't ever come up in your life unless you have some doctor that recommends it. As we get into the medical field, which we're not really discussing now, certain things, even if they're not kosher, if you need it for health, we always, as a principle in Judaism, always believe that our life, we're pro-life in Judaism, we want people to stay alive. If the only way for you to stay alive is to eat a piece of pork, straight up, it's for sure permissible if that's the only thing that can keep you alive. So again, if it's a health concern, you'll ask the rabbi, unfortunately, you'll ask the rabbi, but it could become permissible in that situation. That's probably the only time that this would come up. The other thing is beeswax. Beeswax is actually also something that comes out of bees. However, it's not actually edible. Items that are inedible, by definition, are kosher. If something that comes out, like for example, if you would want to eat, let's say, just this one leg over there from the bee, there's another prohibition in Torah called eating disgusting things. It's called Bal Tashak, so don't eat disgusting things. But it would be maybe a problem of that, but there's no problem of food because it's not a food. Things that aren't food aren't problems to eat, and therefore, beeswax is not actually a food, and therefore, beeswax is permissible if you would like to eat it. Or chew on it, yeah.
Sometimes there's chocolate-covered honeycomb, like actual honeycomb.
So the honey is going to be like the same thing with the honey before.
And the comb is too.
So the comb is fine because it's not really edible, right? But that would need kosher certification because of the chocolate probably and the honey, because you have to know what's natural flavors they placed inside of that chocolate as well. What's that?
Not a big staple in my diet. Just that.
Right, no.
Don't make something edible or not edible. They're selling it as a food product.
I don't think anyone sells beeswax as a food product.
Honeycomb as a
That's to eat the chocolate and honey. You suck honey out of honeycomb. No, isn't that what you buy honeycomb for normally?
No, they eat the whole thing.
If that's true, I wonder if they actually process that honeycomb and it's not pure beeswax. I'm throwing that out there. I don't know. I'm curious. If they want you to eat the whole thing, it wouldn't surprise me if they kind of mimicked it. You have to look at the ingredients. You can bring it to me. I'm happy to, or send me a link what it is. I'm happy to look into it. But it could be that they process that in a way with like somewhat beeswax in it, and then like also flour and sugar, probably a lot of sugar, and then you have to know exactly how they make that because I don't think it's generally edible. Going along our list of kosher and non-kosher animals, So we come up to insects. Now, most insects are not kosher. And not only are they not kosher, insects are one of the more problematic foods. Because insects, the Torah actually gives multiple prohibitions when you eat insects. Most things are like, don't eat pork, that's written one time in the Torah. Don't eat creatures, depending on what kind of creepy crawly creature it is between 4 and 6 prohibitions. If it flies, if it swims, if it dances. It's a bunch of different types of verses of which ones are referring to which, but it's a more severe type of reality because there's multiple prohibitions on it. Now, this I took out of the OK's vegetable checking guide. If you Google it online, you could find there are a lot of foods that we don't realize have bugs in them. A lot of foods don't, but a lot of foods do. This is another place where the CRC app is great. You can click on any fruits and vegetables on it. It'll tell you, do you need to check it? Do you need to be concerned? Like I was just in Tom Thumb on Friday. Someone came over to me. They're like, do dates need a hechsher on them? So, I don't know. Take out the CRC app. You look it up. And it says if they're either pitted or domestic and not pitted, you could eat them with no problem. However, if they're non-pitted, if they're non-pitted and foreign, imported, then it would need a hechsher. So I have no clue how they know that. They obviously researched that well, and they realized the way they make the harvest dates in America doesn't have at least a high enough percentage of concern to be worried about it, and therefore it's fine. Again, the CRC app is very helpful with these things. This is just an example. Raspberries, broccoli, lettuce. There's a lot of things that have, and there's another area of sensitivity. No one should feel, so another, something I think that a lot of people hear this, it's like an overwhelming thought. Because if you haven't heard this before, and you're considering kosher, it's just like basically means like all I can eat is like junk food, like everything natural. It's, first of all, a lot of things are totally fine. Most things are totally fine. The things that are problematic, again, everyone shouldn't feel like, this is true like in all Judaism. When you're thinking about, you're talking to your spouse or on your own or whatever it is, and you're considering, taking another step in Judaism, you have to know where you are and what's good for you and what's practical for you. The Torah, the verse says the Torah is derecheh darchenam. Its ways are ways of pleasantry. The Torah is not supposed to be a burden and like a hassle for you. It's supposed to be beautiful and pleasant, and it is if you grow with it properly. So again, everyone shouldn't, you hear this like, oh my God, what are we going to do? If this is a stress for you, you could talk, find your rabbi you want to discuss it with, or you could say, look, we can't do this right now. Whatever it is, it's a process. But if nothing else, everyone should recognize as a sensitivity that there are people that are careful with this. For example, I'll tell you, they do have, like, for example, by broccoli, there's a brand called Bodek broccoli. Bodek broccoli is insanely expensive. What it is it's greenhouse-grown broccoli, because the florets of broccoli are very hard to check for bugs. So there's differing opinions even within the acceptable hechshers, how exactly you can make them kosher. And if we wanted to give a class on checking bugs, something that could be like its own class in and of itself, 3 different products, anything there's an interest for, we could. I'm not planning on getting too much into it now. But there does exist a thing called Bodek broccoli, which you for sure know has no insects inside of it. I was at someone's house this past Shabbos lunch. We eat they invite us over for lunch. And before, I said the buffet, made a buffet. The buffet is now served, everyone can go. As the guys walk, he comes over and he's like, you should just know that broccoli over there was made of Bodek broccoli. Okay, I appreciated that. It's not like, oh, I'm better, I'm worse, I'm this, I'm that. It's a sensitivity. He thought that I might be careful about that, and he made it for me with that in mind. And he told me about that, which again, it's important to know these types of things. Again, the CRC app is a very helpful thing in this. These are the most common types. If you look online, I think the OU has some nice websites if you want to get really grossed out, where they actually break open things and show. I remember my wife was working in Israel in a company called Vernet Technology, and it was mostly Jewish because it was in Israel, but it was mostly non-religious. And to my wife, they ended up bringing out like fruit platters and that, and my wife didn't always eat from these things. And I remember one time one of her like coworkers were taunting her. I don't know the word is. It wasn't like aggressive. I don't know. They were like, challenging her on it. So I'm going to forget, and hopefully she'll never listen to this and she won't know. But I don't remember if she like went online and found it, or if they opened one up right after they found it, and like she saw this picture of like a pomegranate with like these like gross worms inside in. It could happen. It is a reality to this. If you want to get really grossed out, if you look up online, I'm not going to tell you offhand, but if you look up online the legal limits to pass FDA requirements for Cheerios cereal or anything else, about how much bugs or mice are allowed in it, whatever, you'd be shocked. It's like a gross thing. This doesn't necessarily, again, go with the kosher certification. If they certify it, it's fine. But, there is a reality that bugs get inside of stuff. And from a kosher perspective, that could create problems. Yeah.
So, being that all vegetables and fruit are technically kosher, right? And say you find a bug on them, does that immediately mean like, okay, well, I can't eat it, or is there a way to clean it?
So there's each different items. A lot of different items have different ways of cleaning them. So it's kind of like, that's why I said, like, if we can go through a class where I could just break it down at the end. Any more classes anyone wants to have, we could break down more stuff. You can get into other things, just how to do it. Like certain things, like the CRC app also tell you, like, wash it. You'll see if you see any bugs floating on top of it, throw out that water, wash it again, and if not, you see no bugs, so you're fine. Like, there's a lot of stuff like that. There's different processes for different things, just to validate that they are okay. And there's a lot of different processes for different fruit, because again, like, where they'll get stuck inside of a raspberry will be different than where they get stuck inside of a floret. The process of cleaning it or checking it will be different for different food items. Everyone, again, reminder, if anyone wants, there's a lot more sushi, there's drinks, feel free to get up. The next thing on our menu tonight, delicacies, is fish. So, what's the rule of fish? Anyone know?
It's all kosher with scales.
It's all kosher with?
Scales and fins.
Fins and scales and fins. Exactly. So, this is the Hebrew style because I couldn't find the English one. But again, scales are these scaly things, and fins are the fins. I don't have a more professionally way to explain that. But that's skins and scales. So again, fins and scales. So, fish, unlike meat, they don't need ritual slaughter. They don't need to be salted. The Gemara says that harvesting fish from the water is in the place of its shechting it, of its slaughtering it. So all you really need to know by fish is that it has fins and scales. Which leads us to the question of the public fish market. Can you buy fish at a generic public fish market? Because again, by meat, it's for sure a problem because they didn't slaughter their meat with the Jewish ways, and they didn't salt their meat the Jewish ways because they would never do this. It's an expense and it's complex, and you have to know how to check the animal properly afterwards. So they for sure didn't do that. But if they have a salmon in their fish market, and it has fins and scales on it, so can you buy fish in a non-kosher fish market? So what does everyone say?
It would probably depend, because if it's like sitting right next to some calamari or scallops, probably.
Talking about calamari, who watched the YouTube video? Oh, there we go. How many times?
Just once.
Just once.
We'll watch
It
it
was
again.
awesome. It's worth watching.
What is it?
On the shout out email reminder last Thursday night, I attached a YouTube video from Ari Lesser. Anyone who wants to stay after the class, we can watch it together. It's fantastic. Anyways, there's a line in there about calamari, so you get there when you get there. But it's just shout out to Ari Lesser over there. But one second, you were saying what? That it's a problem because it could touch non-kosher fish. Yeah, Stan.
It depends if they use the kosher knife.
Kosher knife. Stan and Lindsay. Kosher knife. Okay, so these are all fantastic points.
Isn't kosherness only transferred if there's heat? Or non-kosher?
Isn't kosherness only transferred if there's heat? Fantastic point. That's going to be the last slide we're going to get to. How does non-kosher taste get embedded in a kosher item? Right? If I have two items, if they just touch each other, is that automatically a problem? Does it have to get infused into it somehow, heated into it? Like Brian's saying, that's a great point. So what he's asking is if you have a knife or you have a just touching a calamari, so then maybe it would be fine as long as everything was cold.
Are you talking about a pure piece of the meat of the fish, or are you talking about a piece that's cut in a way that you actually see the scales still on the fish?
What's the difference?
Can you trust that if you see it and they're calling it salmon?
They say this is called salmon, so can you trust that it had fins and scales if you don't see it anymore? Another great point. These are basically all of the problems with buying fish. Inherently, if you see if it's a whole fish, it was never cut. We'll get into your question in a second. Let's just first speak out the other problems, and we'll get to the transference. If it was never cut with a non-kosher knife, often a non-kosher fish market doesn't care. They're not on top of kosher, so they'll cut their calamari and then they'll cut up their salmon. Why would they be careful for it? But let's say you have a whole salmon there, and you see it was never cut. So again, you have to see that it has fins and scales on it when you buy it. You cannot trust people when they say I mean, if there's a kosher supervision on it that says this is kosher fish, so you obviously can trust it. But if you're going into an unsupervised fish market and it just says, this is some kosher kind of fish, so you can't trust them unless you see the fins and scales on it. But if you see fins and scales on it, and it is a whole fish, so again, then the next problem is going to be, is what is it sitting in? If it's spiced, then again, that's a problem. You don't know what it was spiced with. If it's sitting in some kind of juice or it was pickled or some kind of liquid it's sitting in, then there's another problem that what else was in that juice with it and what else was like that. So in a practical sense, and especially we live in Dallas, there are kosher fish markets here. It definitely is better to buy fish that is kosher. If you get it at a non-kosher fish market, technically, according to the letter of the law, you could buy it. If it was cut, let's say, you still see fins and scales on it, but it was cut. So, assuming there's a concept called, assuming nothing was sharp, it wasn't sitting in a brine. So then, even if that cut happened, so it's only going to get non-kosher stuff on the surface of it. It's not going to get embedded in. And same thing if it touched calamari. Now the problem is, how are you going to, so if it's just a cut, you know where the problem is. But if it's, the whole thing is sitting with other stuff, so that could be a problem, because how are you going to clean off the whole thing? If it's just that one cut, you can make another cut afterwards. Take out that first cut. And theoretically, it might be okay. But again, there's another way of transferring heat, which is if it's called soaking. If it sits in water or in any liquid for a certain amount of time, that transfers heat the same way that transfers taste, the same way that heat transfers taste. So, definitely recommended to just get it from the kosher market. If you're stuck in the middle of nowhere and you want to buy and you don't have any food and all you could buy is something not kosher, it probably would be better to go to the non-kosher fish market and try to find a whole fish that would probably have less problems than some other piece of non-kosher that you would buy. But definitely, in the practical sense, it would be preferred to buy it from the kosher market. Yes.
Fish, farm-raised fish.
Farm-raised fish. So farm-raised fish is going to be the same as natural fish. It has to have fins and scales. If it has fins and scales, then it's going to be kosher.
But
if it doesn't, then it'll be a problem. Genetically engineered fish is a fascinating topic of discussion. Gets into medical ethics, and we're not talking about that now. But it's a great. There's an interesting response on if you could genetically engineer fish to have fins and scales. Let's say you made a catfish with fins and scales on it. Is that kosher now, or is it still a catfish? It's an interesting question. Don't try this at home. Don't try this at home. That's the answer. It's a problem. Don't do it. But you can't actually buy it anyways. But according to most rabbis, it is a problem. It remains a catfish, even if you put on it genetically fins and scales.
So is it kosher or not?
It's not kosher if you genetically engineered it.
No, farm-raised.
Yeah, farm-raised is fine as long as it has fins and scales. It doesn't matter. You could grow it in your fish tank in your house. If it has fins and scales, you could take it out and you could eat it. If it doesn't have fins and scales, then it's going to be a problem. So it really depends on whether or not the fish has... What's that?
What it's fed with.
What's that?
Know the diet of the fish.
Oh, so I mean that's a great question, what he's asking, which really applies beyond fish, right? It applies to, I guess, cows generally eat grass. You can assume they eat grass, but do we know that they weren't fed anything else that wasn't kosher? We don't really know. Or other animals that we eat or other stuff that's kosher, how do we really know that it didn't ingest? So the halacha is, the law is that once it eats it, it becomes part of the animal. Right? Just like in the philosophical sense, when we're eating kosher, it becomes part of our body. That's part of the idea of, you are what you eat. It becomes a part of you. So in the animal kingdom as well, when a cow eats something, even if it ate, a few insects when it was eating its grass, it got in its mouth with it, once it gets digested by the cow and becomes a part of the cow's body, we view that as cow now. We don't care the fact that it came from a non-kosher item unless, this is really outside of the scope of this class, but if a majority of its diet was from that, then that could be a problem. Like if somehow this cow ate 51% non-kosher bugs, which is almost impossible in most situations. But that would be an application of that.
How about the fish treated with the color? Any color, they put some color to.
So they used to say back in the day that even if the reason you have to have fins and scales on it is because there's a concept called trust. And we're not allowed to just trust people. Everyone who wants money, trust sometimes falls to the back of it. So if you see fins and scales on it, we don't think they genetically engineered those. We assume that's real, right? But if it doesn't have fins and scales, then you can't trust it. Back in the day, there were some that wanted to rely by by salmon, that since salmon had a uniquely pink color, that you can rely on the color of the fish to determine that it's salmon. Nowadays, so many fish are colored and have additives to them of the color and stuff, which could be another problem of buying fish in a non-kosher fish market, that it's hard to just base it on the color nowadays. So, question? I can start. So, the next, I guess, food the Torah talks about they shouldn't eat is blood. Now, everyone know who these people are and why they're here?
Yeah. Crazy.
Mark's got it.
There will be blood? No.
Isaac doesn't have it yet.
Who's that?
Okay, who are they? Anyone? Someone say it out?
Angelina Jolie.
Angelina Jolie and Billy Bob Thornton. All right, for a tekufa, it's a Hebrew word for a period of time. For a period of time, they were married. Does everyone know the unique love they had for each other? They each filled a vial of blood of each other and wore it on a necklace on themselves. It's pretty gross. I remember hearing that still in my head, so I remembered it for now. But I couldn't find the modest picture of Angelina Jolie with a necklace on, so she's wearing one without it. But she does have it, and you could check it out. So they as far as I know, they didn't eat it, so I guess we're okay. But either way, blood is prohibited in the Torah. Interestingly, on animals, the Torah only talks about blood being forbidden by animals. Animal blood is biblically prohibited, and that's why we have the concept of kosher salt. What is kosher salt? And why do they call it kosher salt? I never wondered that. The reason they call it kosher salt is not because it's a Jewish food item, although it might be. The reason for that is because when you salt meat to draw out the blood, you don't use like a fine table salt. You use a much more bigger, thicker, coarser salt. And that salt became known as kosher salt because the primary purpose of it always was they only made salt this because when they kosher the animals, they put this kind of salt on it. So it's really like koshering salt. That's the name comes from. And again, animals, when you slaughter an animal, you have to salt it to get rid of the blood. Interestingly, I don't know if you know of the story or recall the story. There was a big story in the kosher Jewish world when it was just like 3 or 4 years ago. There was a kosher meat market in Muncie that was officially run by a religious person who was selling kosher meat. And again, like happens sometimes in business, unfortunately, to the religious and irreligious, is you get the desire for getting more money. And he started bringing in non-kosher meats because he got them at a much lower price and selling them as kosher meat and thereby quadrupling his profits because you sell kosher meat much more expensive than non-kosher meat. And unfortunately, this caused a lot of people that were all extremely upset at him to eat non-kosher meat. How did they catch him? So one of the ways they caught him is because non-kosher meat is evidently significantly less salty than kosher meat and chicken. Because even though we wash off, and there's major washing processes of all the salt off afterwards, but at the end of the day, it leaves some mark on it, and it ends up being somewhat saltier than in Israel, where they're really religious, so they're even saltier. You could taste their chickens, and their meat's like really salty. I remember I have a friend who's like a friend of mine, when her mother came, like she brought her own chicken with her from America, because she couldn't eat Israeli chicken; it tasted like too salty to her. I never noticed it, but people say that. But where does that come from? Again, when you salt the meat to get rid of all the blood, so that's what you got to be careful for in terms of blood. In terms of human blood, going back to Angelina Jolie for a second, actually human blood is only prohibited rabbinically. So it's not as bad if she would have drunk it, but thank God she didn't. So that's irrelevant for now. A more common application of blood would be in eggs, in blood spots. So there's really a distinction in eggs. Most eggs we eat nowadays are unfertilized eggs that are grown. Most chicken farms that produce eggs in America are there are no hens around. For an egg to become an embryo, it needs to be fertilized in the chicken before it's laid. Once an egg is laid, it can no longer be fertilized. So most chicken coops or farms or whatever, they don't have hens around, and therefore when you find an egg that looks like this is not a sign of a developing embryo inside of this egg. It's actually normally caused by a rupture in the formation of the yolk and something split by mistake or got knocked or something, which causes a little bit of blood coming out from that. What's the difference? The difference is like this. If there is a sign of a developing embryo, then that already has a status of a chicken which is not slaughtered properly. And then the egg isn't kosher because there's an embryo here already and we can't slaughter it. It's not really there, but it's enough there. And therefore you have to throw out that egg. That egg's not considered kosher. But a blood spot like this, it's not symbolic of any bigger issue with the egg. It's just a rupture in the vein. So because of that, all you have to do is take out that small spot of blood, because you can't eat the blood, and then you're fine. Now, based on FDA requirements, there's a process called candling, where they basically hold the egg up to a strong light. You can see through it, and you can see if there's blood spots. And even in the non-Jewish world, people don't like having blood spots in their eggs. It's a little gross. And therefore, they try to not sell eggs that have blood spots in them from federal regulations. Therefore, there is not a real concern to have blood spots in your eggs. It's customary amongst most religious Jews to check their eggs for blood spots, although it's not actually necessary according to the letter of the law, because there's less than 1%. It's a very minimal amount of a percentage of actually being. They're not enough to warrant the obligation to check. If you do notice it, though, you should just take out the blood spot, because the blood should be eaten. But again, if you didn't check for it, there's definitely no reason to think, oh, I didn't check for that, so
like a hard-boiled egg, then...
So hard-boiled eggs, there's an interesting custom with hard-boiled. Again, you could really always assume it's fine. So hard-boiled eggs are fine. There was a custom in Europe, what they used to do was, now again, if you go back further, chickens were around, hens more often. This is another advantage of our modern-day world, that we have mass-produced chicken eggs, that there are no hens around these chickens. What?
Roosters are the boiled ones.
Hens are the female? Okay, no one corrected me. I laughed like 30 times. You guys are so nice. Everyone's so nice. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it. I appreciate Brian correcting me on that. So there were no roosters around, and therefore there's no problems in America nowadays. There was a custom in Europe, what they always used to do was they would always boil a minimum of 3 eggs together. Because since there's a concept, maybe we'll get to this in a different class, or this is some other time, it's a concept called nullification. Even if there's something that's forbidden, you can nullify it if it's in a certain larger proportion. Different things, different proportions. Sometimes you hear the number of 1 in 60. By general taste, if it's 60 times of a kosher food and some non-kosher falin, they say that taste of the non-kosher will be nullified in the 60. But other items, there's a 1 in 2 ratio. So they would always cook eggs with 3 boiled eggs at the same time, in order that if one of them happened to be not kosher, you'd have 2 overpowering it. That was their logic then. Again, nowadays, you're not really obligated to do that, because there's no real concern of blood in them. There are those that believe, for health reasons, fertilized eggs are healthier, and therefore that is a totally unproven, undocumented belief. Based on my research online, a few articles I read, there are those that believe it. I don't have conclusive proof on that. Either way, if you do feel like that, I have no problem, but you have to be more careful when you buy your eggs, because there's a much higher percentage. Then you don't have this rule that you don't have to check it anymore, because once they're fertilized eggs, it's much more likely that there can be a, potentially growing embryo. So that could be a problem.
I have a blood question.
Blood question.
If you accidentally cut yourself with a knife, do you have to retouch the knife, or can you wash it?
Oh, great question. You cut yourself with a knife? Happens all the time, right? I remember, I'm not going to say who. Avi might know. He got married, he was all excited. He gets married, he comes into, we were both in Baltimore, and there is all the time. He comes in the first Sunday morning after his first Shabbos in his new house, and he comes in with his thumb, bandaged up, all over it. And we're all just like, what happened? He's like, it's the first time. I try to get nervous, try cutting the challah for the first time. He just, whatever, cut right through his thumb. So I hope they didn't eat the challah, I don't know, but, so the knife, we can get to this more. The knife is going to be fine in this case, because since there was no heat or other, there has to be always a non-kosher substance and like an inducer or something to push it into make the not-kosher flavor get inside of it. Generally, there's exceptions to this. Generally, cold items don't get the flavor embedded into the utensil. So if you have a knife, now the exception with knives, which is a problem since it came up, is sharp items like onions or garlic or pickles or things that are sharp would be an exception to this rule. We don't have time to discuss that today. We'll discuss it some other time. But if it's just a bland item like blood, and you cut on your knife, so again, you have to definitely wash off this knife well to make sure none of the residue remains on it, because that is still problematic to get in anything else. But beyond that, your knife would be kosher. Yes?
Another blood question.
Another
you
blood
have
question.
chapped lips and your lips are bleeding. Lick them.
That's a great question. Scared to answer this one. The answer is like this: by human blood is only rabbinically prohibited, not biblically prohibited, and the rabbis only forbade it once it exits your body. What does this mean? It means that if you have a wound on your finger, you shouldn't really go like that because it's on your finger, it's coming out of your finger into your mouth. But let's say your teeth are bleeding. Let's say you haven't flossed in a while, and you decided to get inspired by the Kosher Class to start keeping better hygiene, and you decided to floss. And all of a sudden you find there's some blood in your mouth. So you have to like go OCD now and like chug a thing of Listerine and like spit it out. No, because anything that's in your mouth already is fine. You could swallow it. Let's say you bit a piece of bread though, and now that left your mouth and went onto the bread, it would be a problem to then eat that blood. Depends where exactly on your lips, I guess, it's coming from. If it's external of your body already, then it could be a problem. You probably shouldn't try to eat it. Maybe you can save it in a vial for your wife instead and pass it along. The next thing just to bring out, which is a good intro to that, different like lip balm and stuff. So lip balms you don't really eat. So most lip balms you put on are going to be kosher without really thinking about it. Although, check the CRC app, why not? Medicines and vitamins. So medicines and vitamins, this is a very not known topic even to many religious people, but there are potential problems with medicine and vitamins. What is the problem? Often companies, when they want their pills, you have 2 seconds before you swallow the pill and you taste it in your mouth. And there are companies that want you to buy their product or someone else's product, so they want their product to taste good. So sometimes they'll actually coat their Advil or whatever it is with a actually intentionally good tasting substance, nothing to do with the medicine, because then you enjoy taking it. Now, that's no different than any other non-kosher food. That is not for the medicine aspect of it. So again, when we get into medicines, if you need the medicine, you can almost always take the medicine. But let's say there's 2 options. You have Tylenol or Advil. You have multiple things that are all more or less, or you have Motrin or Advil, which are the same thing, just different, with ibuprofen. Then you should try, if possible, to get the kosher version of it. Again, if you need a kosher, if your doctor says you need to start taking this antibiotic, and you need to start it right now, you don't have to make yourself crazy if there's no clear answer to it. If there's any risks or threat to your life, take the medicine, there's no problem. But just something to keep in mind, you go to the store, you want to figure out which one to buy. CRC app's there for you. They have a nice medicine list to tell you which ones are recommended or not. And if you want to know why, you can talk about all these things, about what the potential problems are with all these things. But there could be potential problems with these things. Okay.
Are there hextures on medicine?
Almost no medicines have hextures. The only one that I ever remember having hexture was triaminic for kids. Used to have a hexture, and they don't have it anymore even. So there's some kosher brands.
It's now it's the OU.
What's this?
Medicinal marijuana.
Oh, medicinal marijuana. Gotta know you.
The OU.
That's true. I remember that. I don't know on that. But there are certain like kosher brand products like Adwe or certain Jewish brands that make stuff also. But mostly you could find regular brands that are kosher. It's just, a consciousness of, I never thought of that before. Probably most people you mentioned this to never thought of that before because it's just medicine. It's not really food. But again, in the modern world of evolving technology and food, they coat everything to make everyone have the most pleasurable experience you could have. So it's becomes a problem with medicines and vitamins as well. That really sums up the gamut of kosher products I think that I could think of. If anyone has other kosher products that they want to know about or are curious or questions, we'll answer in a second. There's one last thing I wanted to discuss tonight before we finish, and that is a concept in the Gemara talks about it, the Talmud talks about it, the Kodesh Law talks about it. It's a topic called Ta'am Ke'ikr. And as it's not a problem to have a pig cook for you, it is a problem to cook a pig. So, what is the problem with cooking a pig? Let's say you're not going to eat it. Let's say you just want to have here. I have a nice diagram here. Here's your beautiful kosher meat. Right next to your beautiful treif meat. That means not kosher. And right next to it you have a frying pan. Perfect, right? So here is our question for the rabbi. What's the problem? Again, let's say that I have a piece of non-kosher meat next to kosher meat. I cook them together. I throw away the non-kosher meat. And I rinse off as well as I can my kosher meat. Can I eat it now?
No.
Denise rules no. Any agreeers or disagreeers? I'm just eating the kosher meat, not eating any non-kosher meat, just eating the kosher meat.
The heat transfers.
The heat transfers it, right? But what's it transferring, right? There's no meat there. The whole piece of non-kosher meat, juices of it, right? Which means there's a flavor of meat. Like we all know, you have chicken soup, and even if you take out the chicken from the chicken soup, and you just drink the broth, it tastes like chicken. Why is that? Because chicken and all food items give off flavor. Now, when the Torah said, do not eat pork, as an example, was the Torah only referring to the mere flesh of the pork itself, like the fibers of meat? So the Torah actually, the Gemara tells us, is not just talking about the fibers of meat, but it's actually forbidding the flavor beyond the actual fibers. And therefore, if I cook the non-kosher meat with the kosher meat, so the flavor, like we pointed out, which the most classic way to move that over would be from heat, can get embedded into the kosher meat, which would now render that kosher meat problematic. And not only in a more obvious case like this, where the meat is like cooking with it literally, but let's say I took this out of the picture, and I just cooked my non-kosher meat, and then I cleaned my pot, and I scrubbed it clean, washed it out, and then afterwards, I put on my kosher meat on this utensil. So even the pot, to a certain degree, can hold within it taste of a non-kosher item, and now when I cook my kosher item in it, it can embed that flavor back into the kosher item. And that is a potential problem just in terms of the, like I've been asked a lot of times, like, what's the problem with eating only kosher ingredients in a non-kosher restaurant? Like, I know what they're making for me, and it's totally fine, so what's the problem? So one of the big problems is that the utensils, right before they cooked your kosher stuff for you in this frying pan, aside of other natural flavors that they might put in with whatever you ordered that you just don't realize is a problem, which is probably a bigger problem. But in addition, there could be their utensils aren't certified kosher, and therefore taste gets transferred. We'll talk more when we get into the separating milk and meat and kasha and keeping that stuff, how exactly the flavors get passed back and forth. I just felt it important in terms of prohibited items of the Torah to mention the concept called ta'am ke'ikr. Ta'am means flavor, and ikr means like the primary item. So the flavor of the item, the ta'am, the flavor of the item, ke'ikr, is like the primary of that item, is the same status in terms of biblical ruling, even if the actual item isn't there. Which is what most of it is. Beyond that, everyone should know, I have my phone number, my email address. I'm very excited for all feedback, positive and negative. If there's things you want covered, or you had questions on what I said, or anything, really, for myself, I appreciate knowing what people actually think about it. It could be email or phone, call, text. I think it'll be a fantastic opportunity for myself to improve the class and to improve the slides, and all feedback is very welcome. Thank you very much.